Hundreds of millions of years ago, there were 7 sisters who ruled over the giant mass of land on Earth called Pangaea: Euroa, Atia, Aphia, Annabella, Andriana, Nora, and her twin sister Sauta.
However, these were no ordinary sisters. They were far more powerful than any mortal could ever dream of being. They were goddesses. Each of the 7 governed a portion of Pangaea, and for the longest time everything was peaceful and perfect.
All was well for millions of years, until one day something terrible entered the goddess's perfect world. Something hideous, something cruel, something evil, a monster only the deepest pit of Kerberos could yield. Diarezi.
Diarezi was sent to the underworld after attempting to murder one of the goddesses, Euroa, who was classy and elegant, but had a superior attitude to her. She believed that the area of Pangaea she ruled had to be the most well-kept and superior of all. 3 million years ago, Diarezi plotted to kill the goddess after she tortured his family because they were demi-demons. She did not believe that someone like them should be created, let alone living in her province of Pangaea.
Diarezi planned to kill Euroa by using his claws to make cracks on her face. Very slight ones at first that would be barely noticeable. Euroa began to notice those marks, believing that they were just undesirable blemishes. After they worsened, she went to her sisters for help, and they told her to rest. While the guards were watching over her, Diarezi tricked them into letting him see the goddess. He deceptively comforted her, while purposely only worsening her condition. As the cracks worsened, Euroa felt pain and began to cry out. The guards came rushing in and quickly pulled Diarezi away from her. His plan was to crack the goddess until he was able to pick each piece apart, slowly killing her. Diarezi was sentenced to the underworld, the lowest chamber, the pit of Camaxtuli, where it was impossible to escape.
Scarred by this horrific event, the sisters gathered together to erase the memory from each other's minds. Since the beast was locked up, they believed they had no more reason to worry. Diarezi, however, did not forget about what happened. After being sent to the underworld, he began to plot his revenge on the goddesses for sending him there. He wanted to break up what he knew each goddess loved the most, the relationship they had with each other.
Diarezi's plan was to escape the underworld and finish out his plan on each of the goddesses. But first he had to split up the sisters and make sure they avoided contact with each other, so as he killed them one by one, the others would not be aware of what was happening. All he had to do was figure out how to break up the goddesses' relationship.
After 5,000 years of intense hatred, he finally devised a plan of escape that would not fail. He used his claws to crack the walls of his dungeon, proceeding to elude the traps and tortures of the other levels of Kerberos. After reaching the crust of the earth, he broke free, creating a web of cracks in the earth.
All 7 goddesses sensed a disturbance in the balance of things and rushed from their various corners of the world to see what had happened. Simultaneously, the goddesses arrived at the scene of the crack and pondered what could have made it. Since all the monsters were locked in Kerberos, they were almost sure that it couldn't have been any of the monsters who had caused the crack. Euroa, having come to this conclusion, declared that one of the other goddesses must have done it. She blamed Nora, claiming that Nora had always been jealous of her. Aphia blamed Annabelle for being the most vengeful of the 7, and Annabelle blamed Aphia for being the most uncivilized. Atia refrained from saying anything, sensing it was the wisest choice, and Sauta kept quiet as well, terrified to speak. Nora, angered by Aroa's words, lost her temper and screamed at Aroa for blaming her. She also declared that she thinks that Aroa is at fault because she wants to turn the other sisters against her. Adriana, horrified by all the fighting, argued that none of them had made the crack and that they needed to stick together and find out what really did it.
However, none of Adriana's sisters listened to her, and the fighting continued on for hours. Finally, after what seemed like forever, Nora had enough and decided to take the crack as a sign that it was time to break away from her sisters. Nora slammed her foot to the ground, and suddenly the crack started to spread very quickly, breaking Nora's lands off of Pangaea. Sauta, endlessly loyal to her twin sister, followed soon after Nora. Yura and Aphia left next, having formed an alliance, and Atia joins them, believing that they will be the stronger side in the coming war. Annabella receded to the very bottom of the earth, enraged at her sisters, but unwilling to fight them. Adriana, the only one left, still believes that something other than her sisters, something truly evil, cracked Pangaea, and she will not rest until she finds out what did it, and the peace is restored between those she loves. Meanwhile, Diarezi had created a lair in the North Pole, far away from any of the goddesses, and as the sisters warred with each other, he sat back on his throne and watched as his plan fell into place.
Slowly, the goddesses dropped connections to each other, except for Nora and Sauta, who promised to stay connected because they were twins. Adriana tried to keep the connections with all of her sisters, but it didn't work because of all of the tensions between them. Diarezi, beginning to execute his plan, moved to kill Adriana first. He thought her compassion for her family would be her downfall, but he was very, very wrong. Adriana escaped the monster, and now knowing what actually cracked the earth, went to find Oreas, the one who would save them.
Eroas, abandoned in the desert as a baby, was found and raised by a cruel and self-centered man, and given his father's personality, he grew up to be self-centered as well. The idea was put in his head that everyone will betray you eventually, and if you don't fend for yourself, people will walk all over you your entire life. Because of this, and his arrogant warrior attitude, Eroas became a soldier. He fought bravely for many years, but was eventually dishonorably discharged for committing treason. During a war, he turned traitor to help the enemy simply because they offered him a better deal. Now 3 years have passed, and Eroas has been living an uneventful life until one day Adriana comes to him with a quest.
One day, Adriana arrives at Eroas' home telling him of a quest involving an evil monster called Diarezi who wanted revenge on the goddesses. Eroas, who had been bored out of his mind since he left the army, eagerly accepted, ready to do whatever it took to slay the beast. Adriana told him of Diarezi and what he had done, and then, before she left, gave him a sword. This was no ordinary sword. It was the most powerful sword ever created, forged in the heart of a dying star, and enchanted with all the powers of the Seven Sisters.
When Eroas asked Adriana how to wield the sword's magic, Adriana told him that when the sword decided he was worthy of it, the magic inside the blade would awaken. She told Eroas to head south to the realm of Annabella, and that she would help him as much as she could. Then she left, and Eroas' quest began.
He traveled south as Adriana had told him, and eventually reached the place where her lands met the sea. From there, he would have to sail to Annabella's realm. Eroas bought a boat for a cheap price from an old sailor who was no longer in need of it. Eroas sailed alone, without a crew, for many perilous weeks until at last he reached the edge of Annabella's domain. Now, Eroas would have to travel on foot to the goddess's palace. He made it a few miles across the coast before stopping to rest. That is when Diarezi, the evil king himself, appeared before him.
Eroas pulled out Adriana's sword and charged toward Diarezi, but with a flick of his hand the monster sent him flying backwards. Eroas hit the ground hard, and the sword was knocked out of his reach. Diarezi stalked toward him and promised Eroas that he wasn't there to harm him. Diarezi told Eroas that he knew that Adriana sent him to kill him, but he had a much better offer for Eroas. He offered Eroas everything he could ever ask for. He promised Eroas that he would want for nothing so long as he abandoned his quest. Diarezi promised to make him his right hand when he ruled the earth, and that he would win, and Eroas knew it too, so why not join the winning side? Eroas, tempted by the offer, almost accepted the deal, but thought about how the goddesses would reward him if he succeeded in his quest. Eroas said no. He reached for the sword, but not before Diarezi created a crack in the ground leading to the underworld, and pushed Eroas in.
Eroas, now trapped in the underworld, could do nothing to stop Diarezi from continuing on to Annabella's palace, and exactly one day later he arrived. Diarezi marched straight up into the castle, killing all the guards that got in his way, and soon he barged into the throne room where Annabella sat unprepared. Annabella tried to fight back, but because it was a surprise attack, had nothing to defend herself with. Diarezi cracked her into millions of tiny pieces. Annabella was no more, and with her died her entire realm. As with no one left to take care of it, it would forever be an icy, barren wasteland. Its emptiness would become the only reminder that Annabella ever existed. Diarezi fled the land. 1 down, 6 to go.
Eroas awoke in the chasm of demons, his body aching and his memory a little fuzzy. However, it did not take him long to figure out where he had landed. Just moments after regaining consciousness, Eroas saw a demon coming after him. At first just one, then a group of them following after that. Worried about his life, Eroas raised the sword that Adriana gave him to use to defend himself. In one swift motion, Eroas swung the sword across the demon in front of him and into the other behind him. Although he connected with both demons, neither appeared harmed or even fazed by the blows. Then he remembered Adriana's words. Only those who the sword believes is worthy will be able to utilize its power. Seconds after remembering this, a demon jumped at him, knocking him out once more. Please help us.
Please save us.
Eroas, we need your help.
We believe you are capable of saving us and this world.
Eroas woke feeling fuzzier than the last, but he knew what he had to do. He had to find a way out of here, a way to help the 7 goddesses, to stop Diarezi, but first he needed to make this sword work. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw someone fall and hit the ground just a couple feet away from him. Someone else had fallen through the hole Diarezi had shoved him through. Seconds later, the demons attacked again, this time on the young girl that had just landed on the ground. Without thinking, Iroas pulled the sword above his head and sliced down on the demons, then proceeded to do the same to the rest of the group. But this time it worked. The demons were killed, and Iroas had saved the girl. He used the power of the sword to break his way out of the underworld, more determined than ever to get his revenge on Diarezi and to save the goddesses.
Eros emerged from the underworld, disgustingly filthy and breathing heavily. He looked around at his surroundings. Instantly he knew that he had come out of the underworld in a very different place than when he went in. He also knew that he was alone, which meant that the young girl hadn't made it out. Eros placed his head in his hands, grieving for the girl who had allowed him to escape. She would now suffer in the underworld for eternity unless someone rescued her. Eros didn't even know her name, but he knew he would never forget the girl. If he survived the coming battle with Diarezi, he swore to himself that he would try to save her. Eros picked up the sword, his sword now, and then started to walk. It was then that he realized that he didn't know where he was and that he had no clue where he needed to go. He glanced around at the surrounding vegetation. There was lots of wildlife and many different species of trees. It was a very diverse environment, but knowing that did not help Eros pinpoint his location. Clueless as to what to do next, Eros made camp for the night, taking refuge under one of the many trees, and he fell into a deep, peaceful sleep.
That night, Adriana visited Eros in his dreams, looking heartbroken. She told Eros of Annabella's death and how her realm had become a wasteland. He told the goddesses he was sorry for her loss and apologized for his failure to save her. Adriana told him that he didn't fail. She commended him on his strength when he faced Diarezi for the first time and his bravery when he escaped the underworld. He was now worthy of the sword and could face Diarezi in battle. Though Adriana was greatly saddened by her sister's death, she couldn't let that stop her or Eros from trying to end Diarezi, or more of her sisters would end up dead. She told Eros that he was currently on the land that connected the provinces of Nura and Sauda, and that Diarezi was currently heading north to try and kill Nura. She informed Eros that he needed to head the direction, as well as stay ahead of Diarezi so he could ambush him before he reached Nura's palace. Adriana promised Eros that she would watch over him, and then, just like that, she was gone.
Early morning when Iroas woke, and he immediately began to prepare himself to leave. Adriana's instructions had been clear. He wanted to stay ahead of Diarezi if he wanted. He set out toward the north, intending to arrive at the very edge of Nora's land and wait for Diarezi. He would ambush the monster from behind, and hopefully Diarezi would be so shocked that the fight would be over quickly. Sadly, Eros was not that lucky.
He arrived at the border as planned, but as he was scoping out places he could lay in wait for Diarezi, the monster himself appeared before Eros once again, and this time he intended to kill him. Diarezi slammed Eros against a tree and ripped the sword from his hand, throwing it off somewhere to his right. Diarezi drew a knife of his own, pressing the blade against Eros' throat, and told the hero that he should have stayed in the underworld. However, Eros, unwilling to give up, kicked Diarezi in the stomach, causing him to let Eros go. Eros fell to the ground and tried to scramble toward the sword as Diarezi stood clutching his midsection, but the monster was not distracted for long. The kick only made him angrier. Diarezi stalked toward Eros, who was still on the ground, kicking him until he was overwhelmed with pain. Diarezi then pinned Eros to the ground by his throat, saying that he was going to give him a quick death, but now promised to make him suffer. Then, as Eros' world began to fade to black, Diarezi exploded into a flurry of red ashes and was gone. And as Eros lay dying, literally falling to pieces, he smiled, for he knew that he had saved everyone, and that had been worth it. When Eros opened his eyes, he thought he was dead. How could he have lived? There was no possible way. He slowly sat up and looked to his left, shocked to see Adriana sitting next to him. Naturally, he asked her if he was dead. Adriana smiled at him and shook her head no. She explained to Eros that he had almost died, but that she had healed him as a reward for saving her sisters. She congratulated him on completing his quest, and in return for his help offered him riches to take home with him, but Eros refused them. He told her he wasn't going home, and that he did not need a reward for helping her. Adriana asked him out of curiosity where he was going if he was not going to his home. Eros replied vaguely that he was going to travel, see the world a bit, but really he knew exactly where he was going, because there was a young girl that needed saving.